When you look at modern American history, there's this incredible paradox at its heart. On one hand, you've got this story of amazing progress, of barriers being smashed at the very highest levels. But on the other hand, it's a story of punishment on a scale the world has literally never seen before. Today, we're going to try and make sense of that contradiction.
And really, this one image says it all, doesn't it? On the left, you see the ultimate symbol of political achievement, the election of the nation's first black president. An incredible moment. But at the exact same time, the story on the right was playing out, a justice system that was just defined by this deep, ongoing racial inequality. So the question is, how can both of these things be true at once? How can these two Americas exist side by side?
Well, to get to the bottom of it, we have to talk about what historians call the post-civil rights era. This is basically the period right after those huge, game-changing laws were passed back in the 1960s. The laws that were specifically designed to tear down legal segregation and hopefully build a more equal country. This is really where our story kicks off.
So let's start with the first half of this tale, the story of some really hard-won political progress. This was a time of massive change, all built on a brand new legal foundation.
Just look at this timeline. In just a few short years, from 64 to 68, you have this trio of laws that basically acted like a wrecking ball to the legal structure of Jim Crow. The Civil Rights Act, that ended segregation in public spaces, the Voting Rights Act, that was all about protecting the right to vote, and the Fair Housing Act, which went after discrimination and where people could live. Together, these were supposed to completely reshape the nation.
And those weren't just words on paper. These laws had a huge real-world impact. They blew the doors open for new political power. You had civil rights icons like Jesse Jackson running for president in the 80s, getting whole new groups of people excited about voting. The number of black elected officials just exploded across the country. And of course, this whole journey really culminates in 2008 with the election of Barack Obama. It felt like the fulfillment of a promise made decades before.
But, and this is a huge but, this is where the story takes a really sharp and really dark turn. Because at the very same time all this political progress was happening, a totally different story was unfolding. It was fueled by things like the war on drugs and this huge push for tough-on-crime laws. This was the beginning of the era of mass incarceration. And the scale of what happened is just staggering. Just look at that curve. From 1972 up to its peak in 2009, the prison population in the U.S. shot up by almost 700%. I mean, this wasn't some gradual increase, it was an absolute explosion. Nothing like it had ever happened before in American history.
And just to put that into perspective for you, even after some recent declines, the number of people behind bars in 2021 was still almost 6 times what it was before this whole era began. So let's be really clear. We are still very much living in the age of mass incarceration. So who did this affect the most? This chart tells a pretty stark story. In 2021, for every 100,000 Black Americans, 901 were in prison. Now compare that to the rate for white Americans. It was 181. That is 5 times higher. This massive disparity is absolutely central to this story of mass punishment.
And if you drill down from the national picture to what's happening in specific states, it gets even more extreme. In a bunch of states, like the ones you see here, that disparity isn't just 5 to 1, it's more than 9 to 1. That's a level of inequality that's just, it's hard to wrap your head around.
Okay, but the story doesn't just stop there. In the last couple of decades, the trends have started to move in some really surprising ways. It's led some people to start talking about a possible generational shift. Let's take a look. Now, this is fascinating. For Black men who were born in 1981, their lifetime risk of ever going to prison was a shocking 1 in 3. But for those born just 20 years later, in 2001, that risk has dropped to 1 in 5. Now, don't get me wrong, 1 in 5 is still a deeply troubling number, but the drop from 1 in 3, that is some serious concrete progress. So what's going on here? Well, a wave of reforms has led to this trend called decarceration, which just means letting people out of prison. But what's really key here is who is benefiting the most. This chart shows that while the total prison population is down 25% from its peak, the Black prison population is down by 39%. So that huge disparity gap we just saw, it's actually starting to get smaller.
And if you look at the numbers for Black women, the progress is even more dramatic. I mean, between 2000 and 2021, their imprisonment rate fell by 70%. 70, that is the single sharpest drop for any group. A truly incredible shift in a pretty short amount of time.
So what we're left with are these two powerful and clashing stories. On one side, you've got these incredible political achievements, and on the other, you have the devastating rise and the more recent, maybe hopeful, decline of mass incarceration. It's truly an unfinished journey.
And that brings us to this really important warning from the source material. All this progress we've just been talking about, it's not guaranteed to stick around. In fact, the Sentencing Project uses a single word to describe the momentum: precarious. So why is that?
Well, it's because the same forces that built mass incarceration in the first place are still out there. Recent bumps in certain crime rates have already led to calls to undo reforms and go back to those tough-on-crime policies of the past. Some really successful changes, like to bail laws, are facing a ton of political backlash. And at the end of the day, even with these recent drops, the basic system of mass incarceration is still very much intact. Which leaves us right back where we started, with this huge central question. This is the paradox of our time. How does a nation celebrate breaking its highest political barrier, while at the same time, it's dealing with a system of punishment that creates such profound inequality? Figuring out how to reconcile those two Americas, well, that remains one of the greatest challenges we face.